is that you mentioned it among global African people.
Yes, because of course we're dealing with a global power, the global European power, and a global economy which is under the influence of course, under the control of Europeans and works to the benefit of Europeans. And it's in the context of that global economic power and the attendant military and other powers that the African personality is shaped. So hardly any African group, any significant African group, escapes that shaping process.
There are those from the Caribbean, as in the caller, and I wanted to maybe have us talk about this, who feel that perhaps maybe people from the Caribbean, for example, because of what is projected here as a strong work ethic, coming in from out of the country, working, setting up businesses, that it may be significantly different there.
But we see the same game being played. As we talk further in this segment, we will see that all classes of black people are servants to Europeans. And whether you're middle class, upper class, if there is one, a lower class, you're from the continent or from the Caribbean, from the American system here, the basic role is the same. But within that role are different levels and different degrees and different characters. The white system does not produce one black character. It produces a set of characters.
For example?
And it produces characters that serve different functions, and those characters will have some relationship to their geographical background, their historical experience, and to other kinds of things that go on in the world.
You said the system creates characters.
Oh, yes.
What do you mean? Give me an example of what you mean.
It will create, if it needs, for instance, a certain number of blacks to indicate to the world that it is liberal, it will create a small middle class that gives it the image of being a liberal country. For instance, I'm talking about the United States now.
Okay.
And these people then will be used to try to deceive other black people into thinking that their lack of achievement is a result of some individual deficiency in their personality. It often so needs a group that sees to its interests among the oppressed masses, and it often then must create a class such as a neo-colonial class, the ruling governmental classes, to see to its interests while creating the impression again that these people are free and independent. So it will even create criminals to justify repression. So it has a role for almost any segment of our community. And all of these roles, in one way or the other, justifies its existence, you see.
Do you, in the context that you are presenting this particular reality, see this as a very deliberate process that is taking place?
Oh, very much so. It has to be deliberate because it is necessary to maintain the economic social system. And, of course, it is thought out and worked through very deliberately.
This would say, in other words, then, that we might reach a point, let's say, where things get so bad that you're saying that those individuals who are in these positions that we're talking about say, well, wait a minute, this is getting a little too bad. We've got to open up a segment and create this to calm that down.
Yes, and this happens quite frequently. We saw it happen during the 60s, 70s. I often use that phrase that you hear all the time about things change to remain the same. So often you create apparent change to keep situations the same. The European learned, of course, that they did not have to maintain a direct military presence, say, on the African continent or in other areas where Africans live, in order to protect their political and economic interest. So you create then a ruling class, an indigenous ruling class there, you see, and there appears to be change, and it is a change of a sort. However, the basic economic dominance does not change at all. You see, I often talk about what I call the constants, you see, in our relationships with Europeans. And it's important that we look at the constants, not the superficial changes, you see.
Interesting. Yeah.
And often what happens is that first the European makes superficial the African intellect and makes superficial the African intelligence, so that the African can be deceived by superficial changes, while the basic and fundamental relationships are not changed at all. Down at the Institute of Technology, I was talking to my students the other day, and I told them that, now you are electrical engineers. But your fundamental relationship between, your fundamental relationship to whites is no different from your grandparents who were in slavery, because that fundamental relationship is one of producing profits for your European masters. And so if at some point making blacks engineers, or letting them be engineers, or letting them be computer technologists, or even letting them be president of the United States, will maintain that constant relationship, that change will occur. And so often people then will respond to that apparent change and miss the fact that the fundamental relationships have not changed at all.
You mentioned in the context of these constants, it is, and we mentioned this a bit earlier in the first hour, and I mentioned it to you when we were in the break, the one thing that does seem to absolutely be constant and consistent in whatever discussions we have, whether they be about politics, economics, culture, family, whatever, is this issue of learning to love ourselves versus self-hatred.
Right.
How does the system go about creating or perpetuating this pattern of self-hatred?
Self-hatred is necessary for the system. I want to lead this segment off by indicating something I say quite often, that in order for this system to maintain itself, it is a political necessity for black people to be out of their minds. And I follow, yes, and I follow this up with the refrain that I am not being rhetorical. I mean that literally. We have to be out of our minds. We cannot be within our basic natural personality. When you have a minority group of people that exploits a vast majority group of people the way our people are exploited along with other people, and those people are exploited without direct being directly put under the gun, or that being directly put into concentration camps, when those people are exploited by just going about what they see as their daily way of living, those people can only be exploited by being out of their minds, by being off-center, off-base. And I try to indicate then one of the fundamental things about a black psychology and African psychology in the context of today's world is that the African psychology must begin from the fundamental assertion that it is a political necessity for black people to be out of their mind. It is a political necessity for black people to be dumb. And that does not excuse even blacks with PhDs and well-educated. And I'll explain that in greater detail later on. You see, as we go along, how dumbness becomes endemic through all class levels of the black community, and how even education itself is an education into dumbness.
It is very interesting that you were saying it. I recall that in Richard Pryor's, I guess, peak of success, when he released an album called That Is Crazy.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about it was when one listened to the content of the things that he was pointing out some very serious things that were part of living in this society.
Definitely.
But he was saying something in that concept, which was that you did have to operate from the mentality of being crazy to actually function in this space that they had put you in.
You could not, the world could not be other than it is unless this were the case. You see, so self-hatred is the central keystone of the whole edifice.
Interesting.
And almost any behavior that you see our people engaged in that maintains us under the domination of the European is in some way related to self-hatred, and there are a number of methods that are used to produce this state of mind, or what we call self-negation.
We'll come back and we'll pick up on that point, and we'll do that right after these words. At 1190 WLIB, I see some of you already have decided that it's time to talk to Dr. Amos Wilson, and I can appreciate that.
Things African must somehow be degraded, and even in the name of progress, among us, often progress is brought at the price of course, denaturing ourselves, deculturizing ourselves. In making it in the system, we have to turn loose the culture. You know, I say in my forthcoming book that the African cannot be a slave and an African at the same time. And we cannot be servants of another people and Africans at the same time either, you see. And so, no matter...
Wait a minute, we better repeat that. Because I heard something there. Say that again now.
That we cannot be servants and Africans at the same time. You see, to be faithful servants to these people requires that we give up our African culture and heritage to a great extent, vastly transform it. And of course, you see this in graphic terms in the slave camp. You're not going to hold your original language or your religion or cultural values or social organization and relationships, and you see in the slave camp, all of these things are ultimately wiped out or at least severely reduced. Now, of course, you have today those of us who are getting educated, but we get educated at the price, of course, of learning to speak like the other people, to think like them, dress like them, and the whole bit. So again, and that is the price for movement, often for what we call social mobility. And so consequently, we often then have to lose vital parts of ourselves and culture in order to move or be mobile in the system itself, which implies often that those characteristics are not worthy of keeping.
You know, it's interesting that you're saying this. I had a chance to look last night at a trade magazine, a music trade, which had a picture of a very popular recording artist who is an African-American recording artist. And he was performing, I believe, in Ireland or someplace. And wherever he performed, they had on the little dress, you know, native the dress that they have from their culture. And what was interesting was it occurred to me in seeing this, and the people who had this on were like the record executives from the area. And this was a real thing. They were greeting him in their ethnic apparel. And I thought to myself, the same shot in Africa with something very, very ethnic would produce another kind of reaction.
A completely different impression. Often in the process of doing business, as I go downtown, I get immediate reactions when I wear my African cap. You know, it's a whole different thing there. And so I could almost manipulate the behavior of the people I deal with by the way I dress. And if I put on my cap, I get quite a few negative reactions or fear reactions or other kinds of reactions, and it changes the nature of the business that I'm doing often with people.
From a hat?
Yes, very much so. And
I've seen it, boy. But it's deep.
And of course, as I could, if I dress as a European, I have no problem. In fact, it smooths relations of a type. Even in terms of teaching in my previous institutions, if I came in dressed in African garb, it was read by many people as some form of rebellion or other. However, if I came in wearing, of course, European dress, it would indicate, of course, my ambitiousness, my desire to achieve, or something else of that nature.
But now there are those who might be in listening say, well, okay, is that fair? What happens if someone from another particular area of the world, any European area, came in their native dress to the college or the campus? Maybe there might be the same reaction. How do you respond?
If some Europeans came in their native...
To lecture or whatever, you know.
Well, that's seen as par for the course, and as quite appropriate and in tune.
You were attempting to take them into a deeper meaning of your presentation or whatever.
Because, of course, we read clothes. We read images that are given off by clothes. And this is particularly true of African Americans. Because often it has been used to symbolize rebellion on our parts, or symbolize non-acceptance of standard values and approaches, which is extremely anxiety-provoking for whites. You see, because their system, as I indicated earlier, of course, relies upon our acceptance of it and seeking to be a part of it. And when you signal that you may not be this way, and that you may be, and there may be others out there like you who are not this way, then there's that system which depends on us being in a certain way is threatened. And you get a fear reaction and a defensive reaction, you see, and quite often an offensive one, because it's an attempt to put back in place what is getting out of place. Of course, it's part of the old thing about keeping one in his place. Because there is a certain place that we must be kept in order for the system to be kept.
And this goes back to your statement, we cannot be servants or slaves and Africans at the same time.
You cannot. No.
Amazing.
That's why the system must denature you in various sorts of ways.
And certainly deculturize you.
Deculturize you, certainly. And in the name of a lot of things. In the name of education, or the name of
professionalism,
or being joining the mainstream, or whatever. But that's the essence of power, anyway.
Yeah.
You see, that the group in power is in a position to demand certain behavioral characteristics and certain dress codes and the whole bit.
And it's certainly one of those things, of course, is to demand the idea that those people who are in the oppressed position actually hate themselves.